Courtroom 302 of the Marion County Courthouse was unusually packed. The air was thick with tension, reporters jostled for space, and the audience whispered in hushed tones. Daniel Carter, clad in an orange jumpsuit, sat at the defendant's table, shoulders hunched in defeat. His once commanding presence, as the head of security for Eastbridge Logistics, was now a shadow of itself. His 12-year-old son Ethan Carter sat nearby, clutching an old leather notebook tightly to his chest. For months, Ethan had been quietly piecing together a puzzle no one believed existed. He had overheard whispered conversations, dug through his father's meticulous notes, and followed leads that others had dismissed. Now, as District Attorney Gerald Langston stood before the jury, weaving a web of lies, Ethan felt his heart pounding. "The evidence is clear," Langston proclaimed, his voice booming with authority. "Daniel Carter sabotaged Governor Reed's car, driven by resentment and greed. His fingerprints, his access logs, his actions, they leave no room for doubt." Ethan could see the jury nodding along. The grainy security footage, the falsified timestamps, and the damning testimonies had painted an almost irrefutable picture. But Ethan knew better. The real story was buried beneath layers of deceit. He had uncovered it piece by piece, and today he would bring it to light. As Langston concluded his arguments, the judge's voice broke through the courtroom buzz. "Does the defense wish to make a closing statement?" Before Daniel's overburdened public defender could respond, Ethan shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I have evidence that proves my dad's innocence," he declared, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the boy, standing defiantly with his father's notebook. Judge Hendricks adjusted his glasses, frowning. "Young man, this is a court of law. You can't—" "Please, Your Honor," Ethan interrupted, stepping forward. "I can prove that the timestamps on the footage were falsified. My dad wasn't near Governor Reed's car that night. He was accessing a secure server called Atlas." Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Judge Hendricks raised a hand for silence. "Atlas? What are you talking about?" Ethan swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he gripped the notebook. "It's what Governor Reed and Eastbridge Logistics were hiding. The humanitarian aid shipments they sent overseas, they weren't medical supplies. They were weapons. My dad discovered it and tried to expose them, but they framed him for the governor's murder instead." Langston's confident smirk faltered. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he stammered, but the judge silenced him with a glare. "Let the boy speak," Hendricks ordered. "Continue, young man." Ethan pulled out a stack of papers from his backpack. "These are shipping manifests, financial records, and emails that show Eastbridge was smuggling weapons disguised as aid. My dad left these notes for me because he knew they'd come after him. The real footage from that night shows someone else tampering with the governor's car. My dad was set up." The courtroom buzzed with astonishment. Langston's face had turned a shade paler, and the jury exchanged confused glances. Just then, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. A tall man in a dark suit strode in, flashing an FBI badge. "Your Honor, I'm Agent Connor with the FBI," he announced. "We've been investigating Eastbridge Logistics for over a year, and this boy's evidence might be the missing piece we need." Ethan felt a wave of relief as Agent Connor approached the bench, but his father's voice stopped him cold. "Ethan, what have you done?" Daniel whispered, his voice filled with equal parts awe and fear. Ethan turned to meet his father's eyes. "I did what you taught me, Dad. I stood up for the truth." The courtroom descended into chaos as reporters shouted questions and spectators craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the boy who had dared to challenge the system. Judge Hendricks banged his gavel, calling for order. As the session adjourned, Ethan's mind raced. He knew this was just the beginning. The people behind Project Atlas were powerful, and they wouldn't let their secrets be exposed without a fight. Ethan sat outside the courtroom on a cold wooden bench, his hands still clutching the leather notebook as though it were a lifeline. The voices of reporters and onlookers swirled around him, distant and muffled, like background noise to the storm of thoughts brewing in his mind. He replayed the chaotic courtroom scene over and over, wondering if he had done enough. Agent Connor, the FBI agent who had arrived with impeccable timing, stepped out into the hallway and approached Ethan. His expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was brave, kid," Connor said, crouching to meet Ethan's eye level. "But you've just kicked a hornet's nest. The people behind this conspiracy won't take kindly to being exposed." Ethan nodded but didn't say anything. He knew Connor was right. In the weeks leading up to the trial, he'd felt the presence of unseen eyes watching him. An SUV idling too long near his school, unfamiliar figures lingering around his neighborhood. The stakes were higher now, and the danger felt closer than ever. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, finally breaking his silence. Connor glanced around the hallway, ensuring no one was listening. "Now, we need to move fast. This evidence is explosive, but it's not the whole picture. There are still key players we haven't identified, and until we do, you and your father are targets." Ethan's stomach churned. "What about my dad? Will he still go to prison?" Connor shook his head. "Not if I can help it." But the prosecutor isn't going to back down without a fight. Langston has powerful allies, and they'll do everything they can to discredit you and the evidence you've brought forward. We'll need to dig deeper, and we'll need your help." Ethan hesitated. He was just a kid. What could he possibly do to take on a network of powerful criminals? But then he thought about his dad, sitting in that courtroom, wrongfully accused, and the resolve returned to his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said firmly. Connor smiled faintly, standing back up. "Good. Stay close to me. We're going to make sure the truth comes out, no matter what." That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table of their small house, the leather notebook open in front of him. His best friend Sam was seated across from him, nervously tapping his fingers on the table. "This is insane, Ethan," Sam whispered. "You've already risked so much. What if they come after you, after your dad?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They already have, Sam. They framed my dad, they tried to silence him, and they'll do the same to me if I don't finish what he started." Sam looked down at the notebook, his face pale. "But you don't even know how deep this goes. These people, they're not just some petty criminals. They have connections, money, power. How are we supposed to fight that?" Ethan slid a stack of papers across the table, copies of the shipping manifests and financial records he had presented in court. "We fight it with the truth," he said. "We expose everything. My dad taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's worth it." Sam nodded reluctantly, picking up one of the documents and scanning it. "Okay," he said. "What's the plan?" Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We need to figure out who else is involved. The emails and records I found mention code names: the broker, the architect, the enforcer. These people are pulling the strings, but I don't know their real identities yet. If we can figure out who they are, we can bring them down." Sam frowned. "But how are we supposed to do that? The FBI should be handling this, not us." "They are," Ethan said. "But Connor told me they're understaffed, and their investigation could take months, maybe years. We don't have that kind of time. If we wait, they'll cover their tracks, and we'll lose our chance to stop them." Sam hesitated, then nodded. "All right, what do you need me to do?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I need you to help me hack into Eastbridge's main server." Sam's eyes widened. "Are you serious? Do you even know how illegal that is?" "It's not about legality anymore," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's about justice." Late that night, Ethan and Sam sat in Sam's dimly lit bedroom, their laptops glowing in the darkness. Sam was the tech genius of the duo, and though he had never hacked into a corporate server before, he had enough knowledge to get them started. "This firewall is insane," Sam muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's like they're trying to hide Fort Knox." "Can you get through it?" Ethan asked, leaning over his friend's shoulder. "I'm trying," Sam said. "But if they notice us, we're toast." Minutes turned into hours as they worked in tense silence. Finally, Sam let out a triumphant whoop. "I'm in!" Ethan's heart raced as they began scrolling through the files on Eastbridge's server. Most of the documents were innocuous: shipping schedules, employee rosters, financial statements. But then Sam found a folder labeled, "This is it," Ethan whispered. "Open it." Inside, they found a treasure trove of damning evidence: contracts with international arms dealers, encrypted messages between the conspirators, and blueprints for the hidden compartments in the shipping crates. One file in particular caught Ethan's eye: a list of names. "These must be the code names," Ethan said, pointing to the document. "And next to them, their real identities. Sam's face went pale as he read the list. Ethan, these people aren't just businessmen. They're politicians, military officials, CEOs. They're everywhere. Ethan's stomach sank. He had known the conspiracy was big, but seeing the names spelled out made it all too real. "We need to get this to Connor," he said. "This changes everything." Sam nodded, but before they could log out, a red warning flashed across the screen. "Unauthorized access detected." The message read. "Crap," Sam exclaimed, frantically typing. "They know we're here." "Jot it down," Ethan shouted. "I'm trying," Sam yelled, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Finally, he managed to sever the connection, but the damage was done. They both sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. "They're going to come after us now," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan clenched his fists. "Let them. We're not backing down." The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of sirens outside his house. He bolted to the window and saw 2 black SUVs parked on the curb. FBI agents were swarming the front yard, their weapons drawn. "Even the Carter," one of the agents shouted through a megaphone. "Come out with your hands up." Panic surged through Ethan as he grabbed the notebook and stuffed it into his backpack. He didn't know what was happening, but he couldn't let them take the evidence. As he opened the back door, he nearly collided with Agent Connor. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Connor demanded. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. "They're not my agents," Connor said, glancing over his shoulder at the SUVs. "They're here to destroy evidence and silence witnesses. You need to come with me, now." Ethan hesitated, but Connor grabbed his arm. "Trust me, kid. I'm on your side." Together, they slipped through the backyard and into Connor's car. As they sped away, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know where they were going or what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: the fight was far from over. Ethan sat in the passenger seat of Agent Connor's car, the city's blurred lights rushing past the windows as they sped through the dimly lit streets. His mind was racing as fast as the car, the weight of the notebook in his backpack a constant reminder of the truth he had uncovered. The adrenaline from their narrow escape still coursed through his veins, but a gnawing uncertainty settled in his stomach. Connor glanced at him briefly, his jaw tight with focus. "You're quiet, kid," he said. "That's either a good sign or a bad one." "I'm just trying to figure out what happens next," Ethan admitted. "They're going to come for me and my dad. They're not going to stop." Connor nodded grimly. "You're right. That's why we're not just going to wait around for them. We need to stay ahead." They drove in silence for a few more minutes before Connor pulled into the underground parking garage of an unmarked building. The space was dimly lit, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights echoed off the concrete walls. Connor parked the car and motioned for Ethan to follow him. As they stepped out, Connor led Ethan to an elevator. "This is one of our safe houses," he explained. "No one outside the bureau knows about it. You'll be safe here for now." The elevator doors opened to reveal a sterile, sparsely furnished room. Computers lined one wall, their screens glowing softly, while a table in the center of the room was covered in files and maps. A few other agents were already there, their expressions serious as they studied the evidence laid out before them. "Ethan, meet the team," Connor said, gesturing to the agents. "This is Special Agent Ramirez, tech expert and investigator. Agent Singh specializes in counterintelligence. They're here to help us bring Project Atlas down." Ethan gave a small nod, his gaze darting between the agents. "Does this mean you believe me? About my dad?" Connor placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We believed you the moment we saw that notebook. You've done more than most trained investigators could, but there's still more work to be done." Agent Ramirez spoke up, her voice steady and professional. "We've started cross-referencing the data you brought to court with what we've been gathering over the past year. The names you found on that server, they're huge. CEOs, senators, even members of law enforcement. This isn't just a smuggling operation, it's a full-blown network of corruption." Ethan's throat tightened. "So what do we do?" Singh leaned forward, tapping a map of the city. "We've identified key locations tied to Project Atlas. Warehouses, offshore accounts, private meeting spots. We're planning simultaneous raids, but we need to be certain we're hitting the right targets." That's where you come in, Connor said, turning to Ethan. You've seen more of this operation than anyone. If there's anything we're missing, now's the time to speak up. Ethan hesitated, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. He opened his backpack and pulled out the notebook, flipping through its pages. His father's meticulous handwriting filled every line, chronicling his discovery of the smuggling operation and the people involved. As Ethan scanned the notes, one detail caught his eye. A small circled phrase, midnight rotation schedule. They needed to camp out outside of dockyard or hit the hull to lie down without troubling the moles and the midnights. It was detailed outright, handwriting that reflected this. This, Ethan said, pointing to the note. My dad mentioned this place a lot. I think it's one of their main hubs. If we can get there during a shipment, we might catch them in the act. Connor's expression sharpened. Good catch, Ramirez. Cross-check Dockyard 14 with our intel. Ramirez's fingers flew across her keyboard, and within moments, she nodded. He's right, there's a shipment scheduled for tonight, medical supplies bound for an overseas charity. But if we're right, those crates won't be holding medical equipment. Connor straightened, his voice firm. All right, we move now. Ramirez, Singh, gear up. Ethan, you're staying here. Ethan's eyes widened. What? No way. I've come this far. I need to see this through. Connor knelt down to meet Ethan's gaze. Listen, kid, you've done more than enough, but this part, it's dangerous. These people won't hesitate to use violence to protect their operation. You've already risked your life once. Let us handle the rest. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. But as much as he hated it, he knew Connor was right. He nodded reluctantly. Fine. Just promise me you'll stop them. Connor's expression softened. We will. Hours later, Ethan sat alone in the safe house, the silence pressing in on him. He stared at the clock on the wall, the minutes dragging by like hours. He couldn't shake the feeling that he should have gone with them, that he was abandoning his dad by staying behind. Just as he was about to get up and pace, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sam. Sam, Ethan, something's not right. I think someone's watching my house. Ethan's heart sank. He quickly typed a response. Ethan, stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll get help. He ran to one of the agents still monitoring the computers. Agent Ramirez, my friend Sam just texted me. He says someone's watching his house. Ramirez frowned, her fingers flying over the keyboard. What's his address? Ethan quickly rattled it off, and Ramirez pulled up surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras. Her expression darkened as she pointed to a black SUV idling on the street near Sam's house. That's one of theirs, she said. They must have tracked your friend through the server breach. Ethan's stomach dropped. We have to help him. Ramirez shook her head. We can't risk compromising the operation at Dockyard 14, Connor, and the others are already on their way. Then I'll go, Ethan said, determination hardening his voice. Absolutely not, Ramirez said firmly. You're staying here where it's safe. But Ethan wasn't listening. As Ramirez turned back to the computer, he grabbed his backpack and slipped out of the room. He knew he was taking a huge risk, but he couldn't let Sam face this alone. The streets were eerily quiet as Ethan rode his bike toward Sam's house. His heart pounded with every pedal, fear and adrenaline coursing through him. When he arrived, he spotted the black SUV parked a few houses down, its windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. Ethan crept around the back of Sam's house and knocked softly on his bedroom window. Sam opened it, his face pale and terrified. What are you doing here? Sam whispered. I couldn't let you face this alone, Ethan replied. We need to get out of here. They're watching the house. Sam nodded, grabbing a backpack already packed with essentials. The two boys slipped out through the back gate, sticking to the shadows as they moved away from the house. As they made their way down an alley, headlights suddenly illuminated the narrow path. The black SUV roared to life, its engine growling as it sped toward them. Run, Ethan shouted, grabbing Sam's arm. The boys sprinted, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the SUV closed the distance. Just when it seemed like they had nowhere left to go, a second car screeched into the alley, blocking the SUV's path. The door burst open, and Connor stepped out, his gun drawn. Get down, he shouted to the boys. Ethan and Sam dropped to the ground as Connor fired a warning shot into the air. The SUV reversed, its tires screeching as it disappeared into the night. Connor turned to the boys, his expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "I told you to stay put, Ethan." "I couldn't let them hurt Sam," Ethan said, his voice trembling but resolute. Connor sighed, helping them to their feet. "You've got guts, kid, I'll give you that. But this isn't a game. These people are dangerous." Ethan nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in even deeper. "I know, but we can't back down now." Connor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then let's make sure we don't give them another chance." As they piled into Connor's car and drove back to the safe house, Ethan glanced at Sam, who gave him a small, grateful nod. They had made it out alive this time, but Ethan knew the battle was far from over. The shadows of Project Atlas loomed larger than ever, and the fight for justice was only just beginning. The morning sun crept through the curtains of the safe house, casting pale streaks of light across the cluttered room. Ethan sat at the table, bleary-eyed but alert, the leather notebook still open in front of him. The events of the previous night played on a loop in his mind. The near capture at Sam's house, the black SUV roaring through the alley, and Connor's timely intervention. Every moment reinforced one glaring truth: they were out of time. Connor entered the room, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. He tossed a manila folder onto the table. "We've got a problem," he said, pulling up a chair. Ethan looked up. "What now?" Connor opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos of a man Ethan didn't recognize. He was tall and imposing, with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes. In every photo, he seemed to exude authority, whether shaking hands with diplomats or stepping out of private jets. "Who's that?" Ethan asked. "Dominic Voss," Connor said, his voice grim. "He's one of the key players behind Project Atlas. We've been tracking him for years, but he's always managed to stay one step ahead. According to our latest intel, he's the one overseeing tonight's operation at Dockyard 14. Ethan's stomach tightened. "If you know he'll be there, why don't you just arrest him?" Connor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because it's not that simple. Voss doesn't leave loose ends. He's careful, methodical, and he has powerful allies. If we don't gather enough evidence to tie him directly to the operation, he'll walk free. Worse, he'll disappear and take the whole network underground with him." Ethan's mind raced as he stared at the photos. Voss's cold, calculating expression sent a shiver down his spine. "So what's the plan?" Connor exchanged a glance with Ramirez, who had just entered the room with a laptop in hand. "We're going to intercept the shipment at Dockyard 14, she said. "But this time, we're doing more than just confiscating crates. We're planting trackers, recording transactions, and identifying every single person involved. If we play this right, we'll have enough to dismantle the entire operation." Ethan nodded slowly. It was a solid plan, but something about it didn't sit right with him. "What happens if Voss realizes you're there?" he asked. Connor's expression darkened. "That's the risk we're taking. If he sees us coming, this whole operation is over." Ethan bit his lip, a new thought forming in his mind. What if we gave him something else to focus on? Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "Voss is careful, right? He's paranoid. But if something unexpected happened, something that seemed like a bigger threat than you guys, he might panic. He might make a mistake." Connor frowned. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "When I hacked into Eastbridge's server with Sam, we downloaded everything we could before we were detected. Some of those files weren't just about smuggling. They were about Voss's private dealings, blackmail material, off-the-books transactions, stuff he wouldn't want anyone to see." Ramirez's eyes widened. "You're saying we leak it?" "Not all of it," Ethan clarified, "just enough to make him think someone's coming after him. If he's distracted, he won't see you coming." Connor rubbed his temples, clearly torn. "That's a dangerous move, Ethan. If Voss figures out where the leak came from, you'll be at the top of his hit list." "I already am," Ethan said simply. "But if it helps take him down, it's worth it." Connor stared at him for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right, kid, let's do it." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Ramirez worked with Ethan to carefully select the files to be leaked, documents that hinted at Voss's involvement in the smuggling ring without revealing the full extent of their evidence. Meanwhile, Connor and Singh finalized the details of the operation at Dockyard 14, coordinating with other agents to ensure every angle was covered. By late afternoon, the files were ready. Ramirez uploaded them to a secure, anonymous platform and timed their release to coincide with the start of the Dockyard raid. As Ethan watched the progress bar fill, he felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, he was actively striking back against the people who had destroyed his family. When the upload was complete, Ramirez turned to Ethan. "It's done. Now we wait." Night fell and the tension in the safe house was palpable. Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the city lights as the minutes dragged by. Every so often he glanced at the clock, his anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, Connor's voice crackled over the radio. "We're in position. The shipment just arrived." Ethan's heart leapt. He crossed the room to stand by Ramirez, who was monitoring the operation through a live feed. The grainy video showed rows of shipping containers stacked high against the dark sky, illuminated by floodlights. A group of men in suits stood near the center, their faces obscured, while workers loaded crates onto a truck. "That's him," Ramirez muttered, pointing to the tall figure at the center of the group. Even through the low-quality feed, Dominic Voss's commanding presence was unmistakable. As the agents moved into position, Ethan noticed something on the screen that made his blood run cold. A second group of men had appeared at the edge of the dockyard, their movements deliberate and coordinated. "Who are they?" Ethan asked. Ramirez zoomed in, her face tightening. "They're not ours." Before she could say more, the video feed erupted in chaos. The second group of men drew weapons, opening fire on the dockyard workers and Voss's associates. The camera shook as agents scrambled for cover, shouting orders into their radios. "Ambush!" Connor's voice shouted over the feed. "We've got hostiles. Repeat, we've got hostiles." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What's happening?" Ramirez cursed under her breath. "Voss must have caught wind of the leak. He's cleaning house." Ethan's mind raced as he watched the chaos unfold on the screen. Voss's men were outnumbered, and it was clear the attackers weren't interested in leaving witnesses. If the agents didn't act quickly, the entire operation would be compromised. "We have to help them," Ethan said, his voice urgent. Ramirez hesitated, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "If we move now, we risk blowing our cover completely." "Then let me do it," Ethan said. He grabbed the radio and pressed the button before anyone could stop him. "Agent Connor, it's Ethan. You need to fall back. Get to safety." "Ethan, what are you doing?" Connor's voice crackled back, filled with a mixture of frustration and concern. "Just trust me," Ethan said. He turned to Ramirez. "Send out a fake alert. Make it look like reinforcements are on the way. If Voss thinks he's about to get caught, he'll run." Ramirez hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and within seconds, an automated alert blared through the dockyard speakers. "Warning, federal agents en route, evacuate immediately." The effect was instantaneous. The attackers hesitated, their confusion evident as they looked around for signs of incoming reinforcements. Voss, meanwhile, barked orders to his men, retreating toward a waiting vehicle. On the screen, Connor and his team took advantage of the distraction, slipping away into the shadows. As the attackers realized the reinforcements were a ruse, they turned their attention back to Voss's men. But by then it was too late. The agents were gone, and the shipment was left behind, untouched. Ethan exhaled shakily, his hands trembling as he set the radio down. He had bought them time, but the fight was far from over. Somewhere out there, Dominic Voss was regrouping, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the battle resumed. "We'll get him," Connor's voice said through the feed, steady and determined. "One way or another, we'll bring him down." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the dark screen. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. Ethan sat back from the screen, his chest heaving as he tried to process everything that had just unfolded. The safe house was silent, except for the hum of computers and the occasional beep from Ramirez's equipment. His mind raced as he considered their next steps. They had escaped disaster at Dockyard 14, but this wasn't a victory. It was a warning. The forces they were up against were smarter, faster, and more ruthless than he had ever imagined. Ramirez's voice broke the silence. "We need to move." Ethan turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. "Move? Why? I thought this place was secure." "It was," Ramirez said, shutting down the computer monitors with hurried precision. "But that ambush at the dockyard? It wasn't just about Voss cleaning house. They were sending us a message. If they know about Dockyard 14, it's only a matter of time before they trace us here." Connor's voice came through the radio again, this time calmer but no less urgent. "I'm heading back now. Prep everything to go. We'll regroup at the secondary location." Ethan's stomach churned. He had just started to feel a shred of safety in the safe house, but now that security was crumbling, his fear was replaced by a growing resolve. If they were coming for him, he wasn't going to make it easy for them. As Ramirez packed up the critical files and Singh gathered weapons and supplies, Ethan hovered near the table where the leather notebook rested. He stared down at its weathered pages, his father's handwriting scrawled across them like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Despite the danger, he knew the answers they needed were somewhere within those pages. "What can I do to help?" Ethan asked, his voice firmer than before. Ramirez glanced at him, hesitating for a moment before nodding toward the monitors. "Start downloading everything from the secure server onto this drive. We can't afford to leave anything behind." Ethan nodded and got to work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The process was slow and every second felt like an eternity. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even here in what was supposed to be a hidden sanctuary. The weight of his decisions, breaking into the Eastbridge server, confronting the court, leaking the files, pressed down on him like a lead blanket, but he had come too far to stop now. And by the time Connor returned, the safe house was stripped bare. The team had packed everything into 2 vehicles, and Ethan found himself squeezed into the back seat of Connor's SUV, the leather notebook clutched tightly in his lap. As they drove through the city's shadowy streets, Ethan's mind wandered to the people they were fighting against. "Connor," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the tense silence in the car, "Voss isn't working alone, is he?" Connor glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "No, he's not. He's a key figure, but there are others, people even higher up than him. Voss handles logistics and enforcement, but there's someone pulling the strings from the top." "Who?" Ethan pressed. Connor's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We don't know yet, but the fact that they were willing to stage an ambush like that means they're getting desperate. They know we're close." Ethan's thoughts spiraled as he considered the implications. Whoever was behind Project Atlas wasn't just powerful, they were untouchable. Politicians, CEOs, even law enforcement officers could be in their pocket. The scale of the operation was staggering, and the idea of taking it all down felt impossible. But impossible wasn't an option. Not anymore. The secondary safe house was nothing like the first. Instead of a sleek, high-tech hideout, it was an abandoned motel on the outskirts of the city. The walls were peeling, the furniture was worn, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. But it was secure, and for now, that was all that mattered. Ethan sat on the edge of one of the sagging beds, staring at the notebook in his hands. He had gone through it countless times, but something about it still felt incomplete. His father's notes were detailed, but they hinted at things Ethan couldn't fully understand. Codes, symbols, and references to events he didn't recognize. Ramirez entered the room carrying a laptop. She sat across from him, opening it up and pulling up a digital copy of the files they had salvaged. "All right, Ethan," she said, her tone serious. "Let's go through this together. If there's anything we've missed, now's the time to find it." Ethan nodded and leaned forward, scanning the documents as Ramirez scrolled through them. Loved this story? Click the next video for more, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest uploads.